Hey everyone. So today we're going to do something a little bit different, kind of a meta explainer. We're actually pulling back the curtain to break down the very process we use to create these things. It's a really strict discipline, and it's all designed for one purpose: delivering high stakes information with absolute purity. Let's dive in.
We're just bombarded with takes, summaries, and expert opinions all day long. But what if that's not what you want? What if you don't want someone's interpretation? What if you just need the raw, unvarnished information presented with total purity, straight from the source? Well, that's the big challenge we're going to tackle today.
So here's our game plan. We'll kick things off with what we're calling the information purity test. Then we'll get into the super strict code a narrator has to follow. After that, we'll see how to handle precise data and tables, then look at the actual process of turning a document into a video. And finally, we'll answer the big question: why does this format even exist in the first place?
All right, first up, what's the goal here? The point isn't to summarize or make things simpler. No, the goal is to create an audio-visual replica of a source document. Think of it like a perfect mirror. Every single piece of information in its original order gets reflected without any distortion.
And that brings us to the formal term for this: a non-interpretive audio-visual rendering. A good way to think about it is like an informational mapping. You know how a map maker charts a coastline without adding their opinion about whether the beaches are nice? It's the same idea. This process maps information from text to video, and it strictly, absolutely forbids adding any analysis, judgment, or summary.
So how in the world do you achieve that level of purity? Well, it definitely doesn't happen by chance. It's all enforced by a really strict set of rules, almost like a code of conduct for the person writing the script. These are the rules of engagement.
And here they are, the core commandments. You can basically group them into 3 pillars. First, there's fidelity. You have to preserve all the information, in full, with 0 compression. Second, sequence. You have to keep the exact order and flow of the original document. And third, this one's key: neutrality. You do not interpret, you don't rewrite the meaning, and you must maintain what's called sentence-level traceability. That means every single word that's spoken has to map directly back to the source text. Now this is where the rubber meets the road. A typical explainer might say Adobe's earnings were overshadowed, or that the news spooked investors. See those words? Overshadowed, spooked. Those are interpretations. A direct narration, on the other hand, has to say exactly what the source said. Although results came in ahead of expectations, the CEO, who had served for 18 years, chose to resign. It just gives you the facts and leaves the job of interpreting them entirely up to you. Okay, so what about the really tricky stuff? Let's talk about how these rules apply to numbers, data, and tables. Because in this area, the rules get even tighter. Precision is absolutely 100% non-negotiable. The rule for tables is beautifully simple and totally absolute. You can't just pull out the highlights. You can't summarize the key findings. If a table is in the source document, it must be reproduced in its entirety. Nothing added, nothing taken away. Period. For example, take this table of Adobe's earnings data. It is a perfect one-to-one mapping from the source. Every single header, metric, actual results, analyst expectation, conclusion, and every single value is preserved. So for revenue, you see the actual result was $6.40 billion against an expectation of $6.28 billion for a conclusion of beat. Nothing is summarized. You get the whole data set. And the same exact rule goes for any number. This figure here, 4.25%, comes from a mention of the 10-year Treasury yield in the source material. The writer is literally forbidden from rounding it or generalizing by saying something like a little over 4%. Nope. The rule demands absolute precision, 4.25%. All right, so we get the rules for the content. Now let's look at the actual process. How does a piece of text, whether it's a dry statistic or even some kind of colorful language, actually get transformed from the page to the screen? Oh, this is a great example. This quote about the cockroach effect was in the source document. The rule is you don't clean it up, you don't explain it, you definitely don't replace it with a more formal phrase. Why? Because the saying itself is part of the original information, so it has to be preserved word for word. The workflow itself is super methodical, almost like an assembly line for information.
Step 1, you isolate a paragraph from the source. Step 2, you convert it into a narration script. Step 3, you design a visual slide that matches it. And step 4, the most important quality check, you make sure there is perfect one-to-one traceability back to the source. This is what guarantees nothing gets lost or twisted in translation. So, this brings us to the most important question of all. Why? Why go to all this trouble for such an incredibly rigid, strict format? What is the actual value of all this informational purity? Well, the why becomes crystal clear when you're in high-stakes environments, like, say, institutional finance. This format helps ensure regulatory compliance, it gives a perfect audit trail, and it avoids even a hint of giving unintended investment advice. But honestly, the most powerful reason is that it empowers you. It hands you the raw data, the primary source, so that you can do your own analysis, completely free from the influence of a narrator's potential bias or their misinterpretation. So it all boils down to this. This entire discipline is built on a simple but really powerful philosophy. The goal is to deliver the what, the pure, unadulterated facts from the source, so that you, the viewer, have the power and the freedom to decide the why. And that kind of leaves us with one final thought to chew on. In your own search for knowledge, when is a direct, uninterpreted narration more valuable to you than an expert's analysis? When do you need the raw ingredients versus when do you prefer the fully cooked meal? I guess the answer really depends on what it is you're trying to build.